Arizona Territory. 1879. The heat hadn't broken in weeks, and the dust never settled. Liora Bell stood at the edge of her father's porch, hands clenched at her sides, watching the wagons roll in. The Bennett brothers, all four of them, were back, and this time they brought the preacher. "They mean to end it today," her aunt hissed behind her, voice sharp with fear. "You say I do, and the land is theirs. That was the deal." "I never agreed to anything," Liora said, her voice steady, even if her heart pounded like a stampede. The truth was, her father had died last spring, and the ranch, 300 acres of good grazing land and a creek that never dried, had become a prize. The Bennett family wanted it bad, and with no man around to protect her claim, they'd pushed harder each month. Liora had resisted, but when they rode in 2 nights ago with rifles on their hips and told her the wedding would be Sunday, she knew the law would not help her. Not out here. She was 22, had buried 2 parents, and now stood on the brink of being forced into a life she never wanted. She held her chin high anyway. "You best put on that white dress," her aunt whispered. "They'll take it either way." But Liora turned and walked back inside, her boots heavy on the floorboards. She would not wear white. Out on the edge of the property, where the creek cut through cottonwoods and the land opened wide toward the red mesas, a man crouched in the brush. His name was Onacai. He had watched the Bennett brothers ride in, watched Liora stand her ground. He had known her once, years ago, before the war, before his people were scattered. He had been 16 then, and she a girl with a braid down her back and a laugh like summer rain. Onacai had not forgotten. She had helped him once when he was wounded and running from soldiers, given him water and kept her mouth shut. That had been the first time he saw her fire. Now he saw it again, and something in him moved. When night came, the ranch quieted down. The Bennetts took over the house and set guards near the barn. Liora was locked in her own room. She sat on the edge of the bed, the door bolted from the outside, her white dress laid out across the chair. She did not cry, but when the window eased open and a shadow slipped through, her breath caught in her throat. "Do not scream," came the whisper. She stared hard, the outline of him half in moonlight. "Onacai." He nodded once. She ran to him. "Get me out," she said. "Get me out before morning." He did not waste time. They crossed the yard silent as wind, ducked beneath the porch, and made for the trees. The Bennetts had dogs, but Onacai knew the ground better. They followed the creek, boots quiet in the mud, until the ranch lights were gone. Liora did not speak until they reached the canyon's edge. "Why?" she asked, breathless. "Why are you here?" "They wanted you for your land," he said simply. "But I remember you before the land was even yours." They camped that night in a cave above the dry wash. Onacai built a small fire, hidden from sight, and handed her a blanket. She sat close, shoulders trembling from the cold and the fear. "They will come after us," she said. "They will not find us." She looked at him then, really looked. His face had hardened since she was a girl. There were lines around his eyes and a scar along his jaw. But his eyes, those were the same. "I never forgot you," she said, "even after all these years." He glanced at her, the firelight dancing between them. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. "I was, for a long time. And now," his voice was low, "now I came back for you." Leora's hands tightened around the blanket. "What happens next?" she asked. "You decide," he said. "The land, the house, none of it matters to me. Only you." She looked down at the fire, heart pounding. "I will not go back," she said. "Not for anything." "Then we go forward," he said. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Together." He reached out slowly, brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Yes." And that night, under the stars and the safe dark of the cave, Liora let herself lean against him. She felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. They did not speak of love. Not yet. But it was there in the quiet, in the firelight, in the way she let her head rest on his shoulder, and he stayed awake to guard her through the night. By morning, the fire had died down to a faint glow, and the sky above the canyon mouth had turned the color of ash. Liora stirred first, cold settling into her limbs. She didn't speak until she'd stood and stretched the sleep from her bones. "How far do you think they'll ride before they give up?" she asked, eyes on the horizon, voice husky with sleep. Onacai didn't rise. He sat cross-legged, tying a strip of rawhide around the haft of his knife, calm as if they weren't being hunted. "They'll follow the creek first," he said. "Then they'll try the west trail. If we move east, we'll have a day's lead." She eyed the slope behind them. "What's east?" "Old Mission Trail. Abandoned. But there's water, and horses if they haven't been taken." Liora nodded, then crouched beside him. "Will they know to look there?" No, she didn't ask how he knew. She'd already figured that he moved through this land like it spoke to him. They broke camp quickly. Onacai buried the coals with his hands, then scattered the ash with his boot. Liora followed him down the narrow path that cut along the canyon's edge, careful not to loosen stones. The wind gusted hard once, pulling her skirt sideways, and she reached to steady herself. He caught her elbow before she stumbled. "Thanks," she said, brushing her hair back. "You need better boots," he said, without teasing. "They took my good ones when they locked me in." He nodded once. "We'll find better." They walked until the sun climbed high. The trail narrowed where the cliff folded in, and they passed a stand of mesquite so dense they had to push through sideways. On the other side, the land opened again, flatter, drier, the beginnings of scrub country. A low scatter of adobe walls appeared in the distance. "That the mission?" Liora asked. He nodded. "Used to be Jesuit. Long time ago." They reached it near mid-afternoon. What remained was sun-baked and wind-scoured walls half fallen. Roof gone in most places, but the well still stood. Onacai dropped the bucket and brought up water that smelled clean enough. Liora drank first. Her hands shook a little around the tin cup. "Been a while since I went this long without a roof," she said. He didn't answer. He was watching the trail behind them. "You think they're close?" "No dust," he said. "But they'll come eventually." They found a small room still mostly intact, 3 walls and a chunk of roof that cast real shade. Inside, a pair of broken benches and a rusted cross still clung to the far wall. Liora sat slowly, feeling the weight of it all settle. "When I was a girl, I used to think about leaving," she said. "Not like this, but just going anywhere else." "Why didn't you?" "My father needed me. Then the ranch needed me. And then there wasn't anyone left to need me. But I stayed anyway." Onacai crouched near the doorway, scanning the ridge. "What about you?" she asked. "You always meant to come back?" "No," he said. "Not until I heard what they were doing." She looked at him, quiet for a long time. "And after this?" "Once they stop looking." "I don't have a place anymore," he said. "Not really." "You could stay near the ranch," she said carefully. "There's land north of the creek untouched. My father never used it." He looked at her, and something passed between them. Not an agreement, not yet, but a shift. "I'll think on it," he said. She stood then, walked past him to the doorway, where the sun lit the floor in thin stripes. "I don't want to go back to that house," she said, her voice lower. "Even if I get it back." "You don't have to." "I want to build something new," she added. "Not just keep what they tried to take." He nodded. "Then we'll find a place for it." She turned to him slowly. "We?" He held her gaze. "If you'll have me." She stepped closer. Not fast. Not rushed. But steady, like she had walked that path in her mind before. "I will," she said. "I do." There was no kiss. Not yet. Just the quiet between them and the way her hand found his. Fingers interlaced, solid and sure. Outside, the sky shifted again, light falling longer, shadows growing in the corners of the broken walls. Inside, they stood together, two people who'd lost too much, now choosing what to build from what was left. Neither spoke again that night. They didn't need to. By the second day, the wind changed. It came sharp from the west, carrying the smell of iron and mesquite smoke, a signal Onacai understood without needing to speak it aloud. Somewhere behind them, the Bennetts had taken to burning brush, maybe to flush them out, maybe for spite. Liora noticed the tension in his shoulders before she caught the scent herself. "They're getting close," she said, pausing on the ridge above the dry basin. He scanned the low land below, eyes narrowing. "They're guessing now. But they're guessing right." She shifted her weight, the soles of her borrowed boots stiff and not yet shaped to her stride. "Then we keep moving." He nodded once. "There's a canyon beyond the basin. If we reach the rock shelf before dusk, we can stay the night behind the falls." She didn't ask how he knew about the falls or why there be water where the land looked so dry. Instead, she followed him down the slope, her skirt catching on the scrub. They moved quiet, not because they feared being heard, no one could hear them out here, but because silence had a way of settling between them like a shared language. At midday, they stopped beneath a stand of ocotillo. Liora dropped to the ground, dust blooming around her knees. Onacai unslung the small pouch of dried meat and handed her a strip. She chewed slowly, watching the sky. "What did you do after the war?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed on the horizon. "Walked," he said finally. "North, then west. Found work where I could. Fences, horses, silver camp once. Mostly I stayed away from towns. People remembered too much at first." She nodded slowly. "My aunt used to say the war didn't end out here. Just changed shape." He looked at her, then away again. "She's not wrong. They didn't linger." The basin stretched wide and exposed, and Onacai kept them close to the dry washes, where the land dipped and twisted just enough to keep their heads below the rise. By late afternoon, the air grew cooler. The sun dipped behind the bluff, and the sound of water reached them, a faint, steady hush. The canyon opened like a split in the earth, narrow and steep, with a ribbon of water running through stone. Behind the falls, the ledge was hidden by spray and shadow. Onacai led her around the slick edge, one hand steadying her elbow as her boots slipped on the mossy rock. Inside, the air was damp and close, and the roar of water drowned out all other noise. Liora took a seat on the dry patch near the wall. Her clothes clung to her from the mist. "It's colder than I thought," she said, wrapping her arms around her knees. He shrugged out of his outer shirt, worn and faded, and handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you." He crouched near the entrance, watching the narrow line of twilight beyond the falling water. When he spoke, it was without turning. "They won't come this far tonight." "You sound sure." He didn't answer. She watched him for a while, the way he sat still but alert, like the earth itself fed him quiet strength. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Why did you help me?" He didn't move. "You helped me first. That was a long time ago." He turned his head then, just enough that the spray caught the edge of his jaw. "Some debts don't fade." She looked down at her hands, fingers curled into the shirt fabric. "I didn't think anyone remembered that day," she said. "I wasn't even sure you were real. Afterward, I thought maybe I imagined you. I was real. And I remembered." She let out a long breath, not quite a sigh. "I spent years thinking I had to hold everything together alone. That if I didn't, it would all come apart." He stood and crossed the short space between them. His boots made no sound on the wet stone. "You don't have to anymore." She looked up at him. The light behind the falls painted his face in silver and shadow. "I don't know how to let go," she said. "You don't have to let go. Just let someone stand with you." Her throat tightened. She didn't look away. "Would you build something with me?" she asked. "Not just hide, not just survive. Make something that's ours." He reached out, not quickly, but with purpose, and took her hand. "Yes." She rose, still holding his hand, and they stood together in the dim shelter of the rock, the world outside rushing past in water and wind. There was no need for more words. The promise had already been made. That night, they slept close, not from fear, but because it felt right. And when the morning came, they didn't look back. They had no house yet. No fence, no roof, no settled ground. But they had the start of something better, something chosen. And in the hush of dawn, with the falls whispering behind them and the trail ahead unbroken, they began to walk forward. They crossed the high pass before midday, where the canyon opened onto a plateau scattered with pinyon and the faint trail of mule deer tracks. Liora walked with her hat low against the sun, her hand brushing the satchel at her hip. The wind-up here was sharper, carried no scent of smoke. She kept pace beside Onacai without needing to speak. He moved with assurance again, less watchful now that the Bennett brothers had fallen behind. They stopped near a bluff where the land dipped into a shallow bowl carved by time and runoff. A trickle of water still cut through the center, rimmed by willow and thick grass. Onacai crouched and pressed his palm to the earth before turning his face to her. This place holds good soil, spring-fed. Liora dropped beside him, brushing a strand of hair from her brow. You think we could build here? He rested his forearms on his knees. If we wanted, not close to anyone. Enough would nearby. Elk come through that pass in the fall. She stood and walked the edge of the draw, her boots scuffing stone. The land felt untouched, the kind of quiet that made her chest loosen. I still have the deed, she said. It's in the lining of my saddlebag, but I don't want to ride back and stake it there. Not anymore. He gave a slight nod. No one else will find this spot unless they're looking hard. You'd stay? She asked, not turning to face him. I didn't come all this way to leave again. She exhaled, long and even, then crouched to run her hand through the tall grass. I could plant here, not just run cattle. There's good hold to the dirt. I'll help cut the beams, he said, before the cold sets in. That night, they slept beneath a sky thick with stars, no fire, only the heat of the day lingering in the stones. The wind had settled. Liora lay on her back, Onacai beside her, both of them listening to the distant howl of something wild and far off. You ever think about before? She asked. He turned his head, the moon catching the side of his face. When we were younger, she said. Before the war came through and broke everything. I think about what didn't get to happen. She let the silence stretch, not pushing. Her voice was lower when she spoke again. There was a boy once, before you. I was 16. He gave me a ribbon and tried to kiss me in the churchyard. I pushed him into the trough. Onacai gave a quiet sound, almost a laugh. He deserved it? He called my hands rough. Said they weren't fit for a girl. He turned onto his side, propping his head on one hand. They're strong hands. That's better. She looked at him then, her expression unreadable in the dark. You ever think about marrying? I never had reason to. You do now. He didn't answer right away. Then he reached for her hand, his fingers closing around hers, firm and certain. I do. She didn't pull away. Then when we're ready, she whispered, we'll do it our way. No preacher dragged in. No rifles pointed at my back. We'll need someone to cut the boards straight. I can trade for that. There's a Swedish man down in San Pedro. Builds barns better than anyone. He shifted closer, just enough that his shoulder touched hers. Then we'll trade, and we'll build. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the even rhythm of his breath. I want a place with a porch, she murmured, eyes closing, and a stone hearth, something that holds heat in winter. We'll lay the stones ourselves. The wind picked up for a moment, ruffling the grass around them, then eased again. From the ridge above, an owl called once, then went quiet. Liora didn't stir. And beside her, Onacai stayed awake until the night settled full and deep and the stars wheeled overhead like a promise quietly kept. The cabin rose slow, log by log, in the hollow east of the bluff. Onacai cut the pine himself, hauling each trunk with a borrowed mule from a camp 2 valleys over. Liora shaped the chinking with her hands, mixing clay and straw until her arms ached. The walls stood before the first frost, though the roof was still open to stars. Neither of them minded. They slept beside the hearth pit, wrapped in wool and the smell of cedar sap. On the second week of October, a traveler came from San Pedro with the iron hinges and hand-planed planks they'd traded for. He brought an extra beam, long as a wagon bed, with rings carved into each end. Left over from a church they never finished, the man explained, running a hand across the grain. Figured you'd make use of it. Liora traced the etchings with her fingers. We will. After he left, Onacai laid the beam across the entry posts and secured it with rawhide until the pegs set. It bore no cross, but it held the weight of the roof steady. The first night, under full cover, they lit the hearth and cooked beans with dried green chili in a blackened tin pot. Liora stirred in silence, eyes on the coals. Onacai watched the light dance across the new walls. Feels like it's ours now, he said. It is, she answered. He moved closer, crouched beside her. You remember the day we met? She asked, not looking away from the fire. You had a slingshot in your boot and eyes that didn't flinch. I thought you were going to die. You didn't say a word, just drank the water and vanished. I couldn't afford to stay. I know. She turned to him, expression unreadable. But you came back. I always meant to, once it was safe. She set the spoon aside and leaned into him, forehead resting against his shoulder. I don't want to do anything alone anymore, she whispered. You won't. That winter, the snow came heavy. They stacked wood high behind the cabin, and Onacai built a smokehouse from river stones. Liora stitched a quilt from scraps she'd brought north. Bright seams of color pieced between burlap and wool. They spoke little during the short days, but their silence had grown easy, like the hush between ridgelines after a storm. In early spring, they rode south together. The Bennett homestead had been sold off, no one left to claim it. The town marshal, a man with a crooked nose and half a mustache, signed the land release without question once Liora showed him the deed and her full name written out in neat ink. I never thought I'd see you back this way, he said. I won't be staying. They rode out before dusk, her satchel heavier now with inked proof of her freedom. Onacai didn't speak until they crested the rise above the town. You could have kept it all. I don't want it. I want what we made. They didn't return to the cabin right away. Instead, they stopped a half-day north, where a man with a weathered book and a steady voice stood between them in the shadow of an old cottonwood. No guests? He asked politely. Just us, Liora said. Onacai nodded. We're enough. The man married them with 6 lines and a prayer. Liora wore her work skirt, patched at the hem, and Onacai tied back his hair with a strip of leather. Afterward, they shared a tin cup of creek water in place of wine. When they reached home again, the sun was low behind the ridge. A rabbit darted through the brush, and the smokehouse gave off the scent of hickory. Liora paused at the door. You think it'll last? He stepped behind her, slid his hand around hers on the latch. If we keep choosing it every day, he said, yes. She opened the door and they stepped inside. The seasons passed. The roof held. The land gave more than it took. Onacai carved tools and Liora kept a garden that stretched longer each spring. They raised chickens, then goats. She taught him to read with worn pages from her mother's Bible. He taught her which herbs to chew for fever and how to listen for the shift in wind that meant early frost. They did not speak often of the past. Only once, when Liora found an old ribbon tucked in the lining of her saddlebag, did she hold it out and say, I never wore it. Onacai took it, tied it around the handle of her garden spade, and said, now it's where it belongs. Years later, when a boy with her eyes and his quiet hands asked where they came from, Liora knelt beside the hearth and told him, we built our life from what others tried to take. And everything we have now we made together. She didn't tell him about the porch beam carved from undone faith, or the canyon where water fell like a veil, or the firelight that first held their shadows side by side. Those belonged to her and Onacai alone. They grew old in that house. The land remained. So did the steady hush of wind through the willows and the way he still reached for her hand without needing to look first. And every day they chose it again,